1942. Somewhere in France, German security personnel open a shipment that has raised suspicion during routine inspection. The container looks ordinary enough, just another crate moving through the vast logistics network that keeps occupied Europe functioning. But something is wrong. Inside, nestled among what appear to be routine supplies, they find something that makes no sense at all. Dead rats, dozens of them, carefully preserved, oddly heavy, and sewn shut with surgical precision. Their fur is intact. Their poses are lifelike. But they are clearly not fresh kills, not vermin caught in a warehouse trap. They have been prepared, deliberately, methodically. Confusion gives way to suspicion. One of the carcasses is cut open for examination. Inside, packed where organs should be, is a putty-like substance with a distinctive greenish tint and a faint smell of almonds. Plastic, explosive. The same material British saboteurs have been using to blow up rail lines and factories across occupied Europe. Enough explosive material in this single dead rodent to blow apart a steam boiler, derail a locomotive, or shatter a factory furnace. Within hours, the discovery reaches military intelligence in Berlin. Within days, it reaches every German military academy in occupied Europe. The rats are photographed, catalogued, and displayed as evidence of British treachery. Detailed reports are compiled. Warnings go out through official channels to every garrison, every factory foreman, every train depot, every power station across the Reich. Search every coal pile, inspect every boiler room, examine every dead animal with suspicion. Trust nothing, not even a common rodent carcass. What the Germans never realize, what they cannot possibly know, is that this single intercepted shipment is the only batch of explosive rats the British ever produce. Not a single one reaches its intended target. Not a single detonation ever occurs. Not a single German worker or soldier is harmed by this particular device. And yet this weapon, which technically fails before it even begins, becomes one of the most successful sabotage operations of the entire war. Because the rats that never explode cause more chaos than the ones that might have. The problem facing British intelligence in the summer of 1940 was existential in the truest sense of the word. France had fallen in just 6 weeks, a collapse so sudden and complete that it stunned military planners around the world. The Low Countries were occupied. Norway and Denmark had been conquered. Poland had been divided between Germany and the Soviet Union. The British Expeditionary Force had barely escaped from Dunkirk, rescued in a desperate evacuation that saved the men but left behind nearly all their tanks, artillery, trucks, and heavy equipment. For the first time since Napoleon Bonaparte dominated the continent, Britain stood alone against a European enemy that controlled everything from the Arctic Circle to the Pyrenees. The situation seemed hopeless to many observers. American Ambassador Joseph Kennedy reported to Washington that Britain was finished. German High Command was already planning Operation Sea Lion, the cross-channel invasion that would complete Hitler's conquest of Western Europe. Winston Churchill, who had become Prime Minister on May 10th of that year, the same day Germany launched its Western offensive, understood that conventional warfare alone would not be enough to defeat this enemy. Britain lacked the manpower for a direct assault on Fortress Europe. The Royal Navy could prevent invasion, but it could not liberate occupied territory. The Royal Air Force could defend British skies, but it lacked the strength to cripple German industry through bombing alone. What Britain needed was a different kind of war. A war fought not on battlefields but in shadows. A war of sabotage, subversion, and psychological disruption. A war that would make the German occupation of Europe more costly than it was worth. On July 22, 1940, Churchill authorized the creation of a new organization that would embody this unconventional approach. The Special Operations Executive, SOE. Its existence was kept secret from all but the highest levels of government. Its operations were classified for decades after the war ended. Its methods were deliberately designed to violate the conventions of gentlemanly warfare that had governed European conflicts for centuries. Churchill's instructions to this new organization were recorded in the diary of Hugh Dalton, the Minister of Economic Warfare, who received political responsibility for SOE. According to Dalton's account, Churchill told him to set Europe ablaze. Dalton was a Cambridge economist with a reputation for intellectual brilliance and political ruthlessness. He understood that modern war was not just about armies and navies, it was about industrial capacity, transportation networks, civilian morale, and the psychological resilience of occupied populations. Destroying enemy morale could be just as effective as destroying enemy tanks. Under Dalton's direction, SOE would become something unprecedented in British military history, a state-sponsored agency dedicated explicitly to what Churchill himself called ungentlemanly warfare, sabotage, propaganda, support for resistance movements, anything that would make life difficult for the German occupiers. SOE was formally established on July 22, 1940, through the merger of three existing secret organizations, Section D of the Secret Intelligence Service, which had handled sabotage and subversion, Military Intelligence Research, known as MIR, which had studied guerrilla warfare techniques, and Electra House, which conducted propaganda operations. The combination of these three bodies created an organization with extraordinary capabilities and equally extraordinary latitude to use them. The organization's headquarters occupied several buildings on Baker Street in London, earning SOE the nickname the Baker Street Irregulars, a reference to the street urchins who assisted Sherlock Holmes. But behind this literary allusion lay deadly serious work. SOE would eventually employ over 13,000 people and send more than 400 agents into occupied France alone. 104 of those French section agents would lose their lives, captured and executed by the Germans or killed in concentration camps. The scope of SOE operations was remarkable. By 1944, resistance saboteurs working with SOE support had damaged 808 locomotives in the first 3 months of that year alone, compared to 387 damaged by Allied air attacks during the same period. Between June 1943 and May 1944, SOE supported operations that damaged over 1,800 locomotives, destroyed 200 passenger cars, and wrecked or damaged more than 10,000 freight cars. The French railway system, vital to German military logistics, was being systematically dismantled by men and women armed with plastic explosive and pencil fuses. The challenge SOE faced was both tactical and psychological. Agents could be inserted into occupied territories by parachute, submarine, or fishing boat. Resistance networks could be organized and armed, but effective sabotage required tools that conventional military thinking had never considered. How do you destroy a factory without an air raid that kills hundreds of civilians? How do you stop a locomotive without artillery that demolishes the tracks you want to use later? How do you make an occupying army afraid of its own shadow? The answer came from a collection of country houses scattered across Hertfordshire, about 30 to 40 miles north of London. These were the research and production stations of SOE, hidden behind innocuous cover names like the Inter-Services Research Bureau. The British countryside, with its maze of quiet lanes and isolated estates, proved perfect for concealing facilities dedicated to the development of ungentlemanly weapons. Station 9 was established at the Fryth Estate near Welwyn Garden City. This had been an exclusive hotel before the war, commandeered by military intelligence in August 1939. Station 9 handled weapons development and production, with scientific research directed by Professor D.M. Newitt. The small cabins and barracks scattered through the grounds served as laboratories and workshops. The personnel, heavily guarded and sworn to secrecy, included civilian scientists and military specialists from all three services. The station's inventions were given the prefix Well, producing devices like the Wellbike motorcycle and the Wellman submarine. Station 12 was established at Aston House near Stevenage. This quiet country house, opposite the local parish church, became the centre for production, packaging, and dispatch of sabotage explosives and specialised weapons. Aston House was the first SOE establishment to experiment extensively with plastic explosive. It would eventually produce over 12 million of the time pencil detonators, along with more than 33,000 limpet mines. Station 15 operated from the thatched barn near Borehamwood, a mock Tudor roadhouse that had been built in 1934. This facility handled camouflage, which in SOE terms meant far more than concealing troops or equipment. It meant equipping agents with authentic local clothing, forged identity documents, and disguised weapons. The station recruited artists, prop experts, and even stage magicians to create devices that could pass the closest inspection. The importance of these facilities to the war effort cannot be overstated. Every agent sent into occupied Europe required clothing that matched local styles down to the last stitch and button. French clothing was copied from newspaper photographs and catalogues. Maps were sewn into silk scarves. Agents were sometimes given prosthetics to alter their appearance. The attention to detail was extraordinary because the penalty for any error was death. By 1944, the camouflage section at Station 15 was supplying 90,000 objects per year. A formal catalogue was developed, the descriptive catalogue of special devices and supplies, from which agents could select their equipment. The items ranged from the mundane to the extraordinary, from convincing forged documents to weapons that could be concealed in everyday objects. The men and women working at these stations were an unlikely collection of talents. Professional scientists rubbed shoulders with theatrical prop makers. Engineers collaborated with chemists. Craftspeople recruited from the film industry worked alongside taxidermists and forgers. Their backgrounds were diverse, but their brief was unified. Create weapons that looked like nothing dangerous, devices that could hide in plain sight, explosives that could be carried through checkpoints, past suspicious guards, into the very heart of enemy infrastructure. The catalogue of devices they created reads like an inventory from a spy novel, except that every item was real and many were actually deployed in combat. Explosive coal was cast in plaster molds to look identical to genuine coal lumps. SOE produced multiple regional variations to match the specific types of coal used in different parts of occupied Europe. Lignite from one region, anthracite from another, each with its distinctive color and texture faithfully reproduced. The fake coal was hollow, filled with plastic explosive, and fitted with a detonator that would trigger when subjected to the heat of a furnace. Bombs were disguised as Chianti bottles, the distinctive round flasks associated with Italian wine. The base of the bottle was made of celluloid in two sections, filled with plastic explosive and fitted with a detonator. The neck of the bottle contained actual wine, completing the camouflage. An agent could carry such a bottle through a checkpoint, appear to be nothing more than someone bringing refreshment to a dinner party, and leave behind a device capable of destroying a room. For operations in Asia against Japanese forces, SOE created grenades hidden inside Balinese wood carvings. Native agents were encouraged to pose as hawkers along quaysides, selling these booby-trapped souvenirs to Japanese troops as they embarked on ships. Tire bursters were concealed inside fake animal droppings, carefully molded and painted to resemble horse dung on European roads or camel dung in North Africa. An agent could scatter these along routes used by German convoys. A vehicle rolling over one would suffer a punctured tire. SOE, even, produced itching powder designed to be applied to the inside of underclothing. According to records declassified decades after the war, this seemingly juvenile device proved remarkably effective. One documented case involved a German U-boat that was forced to return to port because the crew, affected by contaminated underwear, believed they had contracted a strange skin disease. But of all the devices created at Aston House and the other SOE stations, none would prove more effective than one that technically never worked at all. The idea for the explosive rat emerged in 1941, during the period when SOE was developing its full range of camouflaged sabotage devices. The concept grew from a simple observation about German industrial infrastructure and human psychology. German industry ran on coal. Locomotives hauled supplies and troops across the occupied territories on coal-fired steam engines. Factories converted raw materials into weapons using coal-powered machinery. Power stations generated electricity by burning coal to create steam that drove turbines. The entire German war economy depended on a constant supply of coal and the boilers that converted it into usable energy. These boilers represented both a vulnerability and an opportunity. A steam boiler operating at industrial pressure is essentially a controlled bomb. The water inside is heated far beyond its normal boiling point, held in liquid form only by the pressure of the sealed container. A typical industrial boiler might operate at 200 pounds per square inch or more. The water temperature inside could reach nearly 400 degrees Fahrenheit. The physics of what happens when such a system fails are terrifying to contemplate. If you breach the pressurized container, even with a relatively small explosive charge, the superheated water instantly flashes into steam. Water expanding into steam increases in volume by approximately 1,600 times. This expansion happens essentially instantaneously. The resulting explosion releases energy equivalent to a significant bomb, enough to level buildings, destroy locomotives, and kill everyone in the immediate vicinity. The genius of targeting boilers was that the damage would look like an accident. Boiler explosions were not uncommon in industrial settings. Metal fatigue, operator error, maintenance failures, all could cause catastrophic ruptures. German investigators examining the aftermath might blame poor maintenance or worker negligence rather than sabotage. This principle of disguised sabotage ran through all of SOE's work. The goal was not merely to destroy enemy equipment, but to create uncertainty about how it was destroyed. If the Germans believed every industrial accident might be sabotage, they would have to investigate every failure, assign guards to every facility, inspect every component. The cost of defending against invisible enemies was always greater than the cost of attacking. The challenge was delivery. How do you get an explosive charge inside a boiler room without being detected? Security around German industrial facilities was tight. Workers were vetted. Supplies were inspected. Strange packages raised immediate suspicion. Coal piles were the obvious answer. Every boiler required a constant supply of fuel, shoveled in by stokers who rarely examined individual lumps of what they were burning. SOE already produced explosive coal, but coal was weighed, measured, and occasionally inspected. A clever foreman might notice something wrong. Then someone at Aston House had a different idea entirely. What else was always found near coal piles? What did every stoker encounter regularly and immediately dispose of without a second thought? What was so commonplace, so disgusting, so universally despised that no one would dream of examining it closely? Rats. Dead rats were everywhere in industrial facilities across Europe. They infested warehouses, coal bunkers, storage depots, and boiler rooms. They were a constant nuisance, a health hazard, a fact of industrial life that workers simply accepted. And when a worker found a dead rat near his coal pile, his instinct was immediate, universal, and utterly predictable. Pick it up with disgust, throw it in the furnace, burn it to ash and forget about it. No inspection, no hesitation, no second thoughts, just disgust followed by disposal. The explosive rat was born from this insight into human psychology. The production process was grimly methodical, combining taxidermy skills with explosive engineering. An SOE officer, posing as a university student conducting legitimate laboratory experiments, procured approximately 100 rat carcasses from a London supplier. The rats were delivered to Aston House, where technicians with specialized skills went to work. Each rat was carefully skinned, preserving the exterior intact while removing all internal organs. Into the resulting body cavity went a precisely measured charge of plastic explosive. This material had the appearance of green modeling clay, with a distinctive almond smell that came from its chemical composition. It was stable enough to handle safely, but powerful enough to cause significant damage when detonated. A time delay switch was inserted with each charge. This device, commonly known as a pencil fuse or time pencil, allowed for delayed detonation. The fuse worked through a chemical reaction. A glass ampule containing acid was broken by squeezing the metal casing. The acid then slowly ate through a wire restraining a spring-loaded striker. When the wire parted, the striker hit a percussion cap, detonating the explosive. Different fuses indicated different delay times, from as short as 10 minutes to as long as 24 hours. The rat skin was then sewn shut using techniques borrowed from taxidermy. The body was carefully reshaped to look natural, with legs positioned appropriately and tail intact. The final product was virtually indistinguishable from an ordinary dead rodent, perhaps a bit heavier than a genuine rat carcass. But who weighs a dead rat? Who examines a dead rat closely enough to notice surgical sutures? Who does anything with a dead rat except dispose of it as quickly as possible? The operational plan was elegant in its simplicity. SOE agents operating in occupied territory would receive shipments of explosive rats through clandestine supply chains. The rats would be placed in coal supplies at German factories, power stations, railway depots, and other facilities using coal-fired boilers. An agent could simply leave a rat near a coal pile during a nighttime infiltration. A resistance sympathizer, working inside a facility, could position one without attracting any notice. A stoker would eventually find the rat while shoveling coal. His reaction would be automatic and predictable. He would curse, pick up the disgusting object, and throw it into the furnace to burn. The heat would trigger the fuse, the explosive would detonate, the boiler would rupture catastrophically, and the German war machine would lose another piece of vital infrastructure to what appeared to be an industrial accident. The first and only batch of explosive rats was prepared and dispatched to France in 1942. The shipment was routed through standard SOE supply channels, part of the vast clandestine logistics network that kept resistance fighters across Europe equipped with weapons, explosives, and specialized equipment. This supply network was itself a remarkable achievement. 2 Royal Air Force squadrons, 138 and 161, were dedicated to special operations, flying from Tempsford in Bedfordshire. These aircraft dropped agents by parachute, landed secretly to pick up personnel, and delivered supplies to reception committees organized by resistance networks across occupied Europe. A forward base at Tangmere in Sussex handled particularly sensitive operations using Lysander aircraft, small planes capable of landing on improvised airstrips in occupied territory. SOE also maintained a small private navy, using French fishing boats based in the Helford River in Cornwall to ferry agents to the coast of Brittany. Polish naval vessels, operating from Gibraltar, transported more than 50 agents to the still unoccupied southern coast of France between April and November 1942. Submarines occasionally carried agents when other methods were too risky. The rats were destined for French resistance networks who would handle final placement. These networks, typically consisting of an organizer, a wireless operator, and 1 or more couriers, had been built up painfully over the preceding months. SOE headquarters in London anticipated reports of mysterious boiler explosions at German facilities within weeks of deployment. Those reports never came, because the shipment never arrived. German security forces intercepted the container somewhere in France. The exact circumstances of the discovery are lost to the historical record. Perhaps it was a routine inspection that happened to examine the wrong container. Perhaps an informant provided a tip. Perhaps the shipment was simply unlucky, caught up in a random security check at the wrong moment. A surviving specimen later bore a French police identification label dated Lyon 1942, suggesting the rats reached France before being discovered. Whatever the cause, the result was decisive. When German personnel opened that container and found dozens of carefully prepared rat carcasses, they immediately recognized that something extraordinary had fallen into their hands. These were not ordinary vermin, these were weapons. The discovery was escalated rapidly up the chain of command. What happened next transformed a tactical failure into a strategic success beyond anything SOE could have planned. The Germans were fascinated by what they had found. Here was tangible proof of British ingenuity and ruthlessness. Here was evidence of the unconventional tactics Churchill's secret army was willing to employ against the Reich. The explosive rats were not simply confiscated and destroyed. They were studied, photographed, documented, and preserved for educational purposes. Specimens from the intercepted shipment were distributed to military training academies across occupied Europe. Officers received detailed briefings on this new threat from British intelligence. The rats were displayed alongside other captured SOE equipment, evidence of the dangers facing German personnel in occupied territory. Warnings went out through official military and industrial channels. Every garrison commander was informed. Every factory foreman received instructions. Every railway official was alerted. The message was clear and urgent. The British are hiding explosives inside dead rats. Any dead rodent found near coal supplies or boiler rooms could be a bomb. All personnel must exercise extreme caution. The operational consequences of this German response were immediate and substantial, not to the British, but to the Germans themselves. Consider the psychology from the German perspective. You are a soldier, a factory worker, or a railway employee in occupied France. You have just been officially informed that the British are concealing bombs inside dead rats. Every coal pile in your facility might contain one. Every warehouse corner, every storage area, every locomotive tender, every place where rats naturally congregate could now harbour deadly weapons. How do you respond to this threat? You search. You search thoroughly, methodically, exhaustively. You establish new inspection protocols. You assign personnel specifically to examine coal supplies before they reach the boilers. You slow down operations to ensure safety. You report every dead rat to your superiors. You dispose of rodent carcasses with elaborate caution, never simply throwing them into fires. The cumulative impact of these precautions was enormous. German factories lost productive time to security inspections. Railway operations slowed as coal supplies were examined. Personnel who should have been performing their normal duties were diverted to searching for explosive rodents. Now multiply this across the entire occupied territory. Thousands of facilities spread across Western Europe. Tens of thousands of coal piles, storage areas, and boiler rooms that might harbour explosive rats. Hundreds of thousands of man-hours diverted from productive work to searching for weapons that would never be found. Because those weapons did not exist, SOE had produced approximately 100 explosive rats in total. All of them were intercepted in a single shipment. After the German discovery exposed the program, British intelligence made a calculated decision. The element of surprise was gone. Any future shipments would face heightened security. The rats would be less likely to reach their targets. The program was abandoned. No second batch was ever created. No additional explosive rats were ever dispatched. The intercepted shipment represented the complete British inventory, but the Germans had no way of knowing this. Their intelligence could not tell them how many explosive rats the British had originally produced. Their security forces could not confirm that all devices had been captured. For all German authorities knew, hundreds or thousands of explosive rats had already been distributed to resistance networks across Europe. The intercepted shipment might have been just one of many, so the Germans continued searching. For months, every dead rodent became suspect. Every coal pile required inspection. Every factory foreman had to balance production demands against the possibility that some overlooked rat carcass might destroy his facility and kill his workers. The SOE internal report on the operation concluded with a remarkable and honest assessment. This device caused considerable trouble to the enemy, but not quite in the way that was intended. The Germans intercepted the container of dead rats before they could be used for operational purposes. But all was not lost. According to an SOE report, their discovery had an extraordinary moral effect. The rodents were exhibited at all German military schools, prompting a hunt for hundreds of rats the enemy believed were distributed on the continent. SOE concluded with a statement that captures the essence of the entire program. The trouble caused to them was a much greater success to us than if the rats had actually been used. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Now, let me explain why this accidental success reveals something profound about the nature of asymmetric conflict. The explosive rat program illustrates a principle that military theorists would later formalize as the disproportionate response problem. When facing unconventional threats, the costs of defense almost always exceed the costs of attack. The attacker chooses when, where, and how to strike. The defender must guard everything, everywhere, all the time. SOE invested modest resources in producing approximately 100 explosive rats. The procurement of rat carcasses, the plastic explosive, the time delay fuses, the labor of skilled technicians, all of this cost relatively little in the context of a global war. The Germans invested vastly more resources in responding to the threat. Security briefings across an entire military apparatus, new inspection protocols at thousands of facilities, personnel diverted from productive work to searching coal piles, reduced efficiency throughout the industrial economy of occupied Europe. The ratio of British investment to German response was overwhelmingly favourable to the British. A handful of pounds produced results that would have required millions of pounds to achieve through conventional military action. Compare this to other weapons of the era. A British Lancaster bomber required enormous industrial capacity to manufacture, tens of thousands of pounds per aircraft. Training the 7-man crew took months. Operating the bomber required fuel, maintenance, ammunition, and accepting catastrophic loss rates, sometimes exceeding 5% per mission. All of this to destroy 1 or 2 targets before statistical probability caught up with the crew. A single explosive rat required 1 dead rodent, a few ounces of plastic explosive, and basic taxidermy skills. It could be transported by a single agent in a pocket or small bag. It required no fuel, no crew, no maintenance. This asymmetry was not accidental. The entire philosophy of SOE was built around the recognition that Britain, facing enemies with superior manpower and industrial capacity, could not win through conventional means alone. Small, cheap, unconventional attacks could impose disproportionate costs on the enemy. Sabotage did not need to destroy German industry. It needed to make Germans afraid of their own industry. It needed to force them to divert resources from fighting to guarding. The explosive rat was perhaps the purest expression of this philosophy, precisely because it failed. Consider what might have happened if the rats had actually reached their targets. Perhaps a dozen successful detonations across occupied Europe, perhaps a dozen destroyed boilers, a dozen disrupted factories, a few dozen casualties among German personnel and impressed workers. These results would have been tactically useful, but strategically limited. A dozen boiler explosions would not have crippled German war production. Instead, the interception achieved something far more valuable. It destroyed German confidence in their own security apparatus. It consumed resources across an entire continent. It created a permanent background anxiety that affected every facility, every worker, every officer responsible for industrial operations in occupied territory. Other SOE camouflage devices achieved effects through similar mechanisms. The explosive coal program produced tons of fake coal before the war ended. German rail operators reported constant delays as crews insisted on inspecting coal supplies before loading locomotive tenders. The mere knowledge that explosive coal existed was enough to slow operations, even when no actual devices were present. The effectiveness of these unconventional methods was demonstrated repeatedly throughout the war. In June 1943, SOE agent Michael Trotobas and his farmer network, disguised as Gestapo agents, talked their way into the Lille locomotive works and destroyed it. The Royal Air Force had made 4 attempts to destroy the same facility from the air and had failed every time. Trotobas was later killed in a shootout in Lille in November 1943, but his network continued operating, conducting 15 to 20 railway derailments per week at its peak. Another SOE agent, Ben Cowburn, completed 4 separate missions in France between 1941 and 1944, the longest cumulative period of any active SOE agent. One of his most successful operations was the destruction of 6 railway engines at Troyes. He also arranged for consignments of itching powder to be left with local laundries and sprinkled into German uniforms, causing misery among occupation troops. These operations demonstrated that sabotage conducted by small teams could sometimes achieve results that massive bombing raids could not, and they consumed far fewer resources. The Americans, through the Office of Strategic Services, developed similar programs. American explosive coal included an elaborate camouflage kit that allowed field agents to paint the devices to match local coal varieties precisely. The OSS understood the value of unconventional approaches, but American resources and industrial capacity meant they generally favored direct action over psychological warfare when forced to choose. The United States could afford to build enough bombers to destroy German industry through brute force. Britain, more resource-constrained and fighting for survival, understood more deeply that perception could be more powerful than reality. The legacy of the explosive rat program extended far beyond World War II. The concept of weapons that succeed by failing, that consume enemy resources through the mere threat of their existence, became a cornerstone of asymmetric warfare theory throughout the Cold War and into the present century. Modern examples of this principle operate at every scale of conflict. Improvised explosive devices in insurgencies do not need to detonate to affect enemy behavior. The possibility that any roadside object might be a bomb forces convoys to slow down, clear routes, and divert resources to counter operations. The costs of defense always exceed the costs of attack when threats are unpredictable. The program also influenced post-war thinking about information warfare. Sometimes the most effective message is simply uncertainty. We could be anywhere. You cannot guard against everything. The Germans exhibited captured explosive rats at their military academies with the intention of warning their own forces about British treachery. The actual effect was to spread exactly the fear that SOE wanted them to feel. Every officer who saw those photographs returned to his command with new anxiety. The British weapon replicated itself through German security protocols, achieving distribution that SOE logistics could never have accomplished directly. Documents related to the explosive rat program were classified as secret for more than 50 years after the war ended. When British government archives declassified the relevant files in October 1999, historians examining the records found SOE's own assessment of what the program had achieved. The conclusion was unambiguous. The trouble caused to them was a much greater success to us than if the rats had actually been used. A few artifacts from the program survived the war. A rare training example of an explosive rat dummy was sold at auction in 2017 for nearly $2,000. The specimen bore a French police label dated Lyon 1942, providing physical evidence of when and where the interception occurred. Another training dummy from the Mountfitchet Castle Museum sold separately, labelled with SOE technical specifications, including detonator type, time delay pencil, and primer information. These single artifacts, never deployed in combat, never detonated against any target, represent one of the most cost-effective weapons programs in military history. Today, the explosive rat stands as a monument to creative thinking under impossible pressure. Britain, in the summer of 1940, faced existential threat with resources that seemed hopelessly inadequate. The German military machine had crushed every opponent it faced. Conventional military wisdom suggested that further resistance was futile. The scale of what SOE accomplished with limited resources remains remarkable. From its formation in July 1940 to its dissolution in January 1946, the organization sent agents into virtually every occupied country in Europe and many in Asia. In France alone, SOE supported resistance activities that tied down German troops who might otherwise have reinforced the Normandy defenses. On the eve of D-Day in June 1944, secret messages broadcast by the BBC alerted SOE agents and resistance forces across France to make maximum effort in carrying out sabotage. The resulting attacks on railways, communications, and power networks helped prevent the Germans from concentrating their forces against the invasion beaches. The assassination of Reinhard Heydrich in Czechoslovakia in 1942 was carried out using weapons developed at SOE facilities. The destruction of the heavy water plant at Vemork in Norway in 1943, which delayed the German atomic bomb program, was another SOE operation. These dramatic successes demonstrated what unconventional warfare could achieve. But the explosive rat program, despite producing no dramatic explosions and claiming no enemy casualties, exemplified something equally important. It demonstrated that imagination itself could be a weapon, that the threat of attack could be more disruptive than attack itself, that a clever idea, even one that failed in execution, could succeed beyond all reasonable expectation. The conventional response to such circumstances might have been despair or negotiation. The SOE response was imagination. If we cannot outfight the enemy through superior strength, we will outthink them through superior creativity. If we cannot destroy their industry through direct attack, we will destroy their peace of mind through constant uncertainty. The German security personnel who opened that suspicious shipment in 1942 believed they had achieved a significant intelligence victory. They had intercepted a British secret weapon before it could be deployed. They had exposed enemy schemes. They had protected the Reich from a clever sabotage operation. What they had actually done, without any possibility of realizing it at the time, was launch the most expensive and futile rat hunt in military history. German resources that should have supported combat operations were diverted to searching coal piles for weapons that no longer existed. German confidence in their own security was undermined by evidence of British ingenuity that suggested worse surprises might be coming. Not a single explosive rat ever detonated in combat against a German target. Not a single boiler was destroyed by this particular device. Not a single German soldier or worker was killed by an explosive rodent. By every conventional measure of weapon effectiveness, the program was a complete failure. Yet the explosive rat achieved what many conventional weapons could not. It created lasting fear. It consumed enemy resources over an extended period. It demonstrated that British intelligence could strike anywhere, in any form, at any time. The psychological impact outlasted the physical threat by months or even years, and SOE counted it among their greatest successes. Because in the shadow war that Winston Churchill unleashed in 1940, the war fought in occupied factories and railway depots and power stations across Europe. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon is the one that makes your enemy afraid of shadows.